Colleagues, I rise today to speak to House Bill 4242, otherwise known as the K-12 budget. Friends, colleagues, I know that supporting public education is not a partisan value. I have enjoyed many conversations with multiple members from both sides of the aisle. Colleagues asking an opinion based on my experience as an administrator and with my PhD in educational leadership regarding a multitude of issues, from snow days to school funding. Today, I am speaking to the reality of our underfunded school system. I will be speaking from my experiences that regularly occurred at my principal's desk and from the body of research that exists about how to reach and teach every child every day. If I asked every member of this chamber today a simple question, do you believe every child in the state of Michigan deserves to learn and grow in a healthy physical environment with qualified teachers and receive the support they need to close learning gaps or even better, excel in an area of passion and interest? I know that my colleagues would say, yes, they do. If I asked every member in this chamber today how important the value of appropriately educating our children is to them, most would put K-12 education as one of their top 2 priorities. If I asked every member in this chamber today if they thought our current system was accomplishing those goals that we carry in our hearts for our children, they would say no. Placing 41st out of 50 states in grade level reading outcomes is not good enough. I know that we all would agree that Michiganders deserve better. Many members on both sides of the aisle have asked me, how do we fix it, Cheryl? I have one response. Educational professionals know what works. Literacy and math interventions taught at low student-teacher ratios by certified reading and math specialists. Behavioral interventions taught and modeled school-wide with social work support. Early interventions through strong pre-K programs, and support for special education students by providing enough special education teachers and parapros to maximize the time learning in a general education setting. Everyone agrees. This is what Michiganders deserve. More importantly, the academic and school research communities agree. This is what all children deserve. But talk is cheap. And I, for one, as a person who has walked this walk, am over it. I am over looking at schools who can't attract the best teachers and have 40% of their classrooms led by non-certified substitutes. I am over watching parents and students begging me for help for their children, only for me to say to them, I am sorry. We used to have a reading specialist who could help, but we can no longer afford one, let alone 2. I am over watching my great teachers leave the classroom because they can no longer support their families on a salary that has been frozen or cut year after year for over a decade. I am over looking at a special education individual education plan, also known as an IEP, knowing that the supports and words listed on that document are nearly impossible to meet because my special ed staff has to be reduced by 1 full teacher yet again. This is a civil rights issue, and our Michigan parents, teachers, and students, especially those with special needs, deserve better. Having spent 30 years in public education and having studied school funding in depth, I know how the shell game works. The state loves to give schools money just to take it away. Our former governor used to pretend that how much more school aid he gave to his schools, but he conveniently forgot to share that the majority of that money had to be returned to the state for retirement costs as a pass-through and was never intended to reach the classroom. I have heard over the course of these budget negotiations that the high school money only went to teacher salaries and never made it into the classroom. I am overhearing this argument. Schools do not create widgets, they create humans. Teachers are not robots, they are humans. They are the professionals constantly observing, assessing, adjusting, and supporting the individual smaller humans in their care. When teacher salaries are adjusted due to increased revenue, that means that class sizes are smaller, a specialist can be hired, a parapro can be added to assist in the classroom. There is no better use for our tax dollars. When it comes to this argument, Michiganders deserve better. I have been told throughout the budget process it is unfortunate that we do not have enough money to support declining enrollment, aging schools, and student populations of color, or students who do not speak English, or those who come from poverty. Unfortunately, we have to make tough decisions. I am overhearing this lazy response to a complex and urgent problem. It is so easy for us who sit in this chamber to wave our hands and say, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. Nothing we can do. It is our job. We can't pass this buck. It is not the governor's job. It is not the Department of Education's job. It is not the Attorney General's job. It is our job. And when you compare the cost of teaching children in Michigan with the current revenue as suggested by this budget, the math simply doesn't add up. Of course, there is something we can do. We can fully fund our schools to meet the needs of our children, all children, every child in Michigan, because Michiganders deserve better. This budget makes a lot of revenue assumptions, such as the removal of K-12 revenue from the sales tax attached to gasoline. That's right, this budget is actually taking money away from the K-12 budget. Those who support the shell game will say, but schools are getting more money per pupil in the foundation allowance. This is true. They are until the subtractions below that line on the budget begin. A subtraction for additional per pupil funding for high school students, a loss of revenue that should be going to schools from gasoline sales tax and online purchase sales tax is removed. The School Finance Research Collaborative's analysis correctly described Michigan schools as underfunded by at least $2,000 per pupil, not including additional costs for special education, which is underfunded by $700 million. This budget only increases the per pupil allowance by 1.4%, while it cuts important categoricals. I have reached out to a number of school districts throughout the state. When the fixed costs of increasing retirement, insurance, steps and levels, and a decrease of student populations across the state, schools will be working once again with a budget deficit as compared to last year. One school near my district will receive an additional $607,000. However, next year their cost of doing business increases $825,000, leaving a $250,000 shortfall. The smallest school in my district is budgeting for a 30-student decrease. They'll receive $115,000 extra money, but next year's costs are over $150,000. This will force them to increase class size again. It will affect their ability to support an aging infrastructure again. And it will force significant judgments to their multi-tiered system of support, which is required by law. It is unrealistic to think that these cuts will not negatively affect student outcomes. Even one of our state's largest school districts, which is projected to lose 309 students, they'll receive $90 per pupil increase, but will lose $105,000 in high school categoricals. This will result in a 10 FTE decrease, increased class sizes, fewer opportunities for math and reading supports as required by law, cuts in counselors, social work, and therefore lowered outcomes. I am urging my colleagues to vote no on this K-12 budget and support a plan, a real plan, to add real money to K-12 funding and work toward full funding of an additional $2,000 per pupil and support special education needs of every child. This budget removes $325 million in revenue from state tax currently appropriated to K-12 from the sale of gasoline, and it leaves almost $185 million on the balance sheet. When asked, where's that money going to go? The answer is simple: to roads. This is a total of a potential additional revenue of $510 million, which would pay for over 5,100 additional teachers or counselors for the state of Michigan. Let me say that again. The revenue left on the table or being misappropriated to infrastructure would pay for over 5,100 additional teachers or counselors. So do you value education, I ask my colleagues? Do you value it enough to actually return this money back to K-12 where it belongs? If you say yes, then let's do it. Let's not minimally address roads on the backs of our children. Let's seek appropriate revenue to do both. If no, then I'm sorry, and I do not mean to be disrespectful, but you do not value education. You are not serious about improving learning outcomes. You do not want more counselors or mental health professionals or liaison officers, as I often hear, and I am overhearing that you are. This budget harms students, increases teacher shortage crisis, and doesn't shift nearly enough money to even begin to fix the roads. This House of Representatives, in supporting this flawed budget, once again fails our children and our citizens under the false argument that we can appropriately fund education and fix the roads without raising revenue. It was not true in 2015. It is not true today. Once again, the money will be spent on both schools and roads. The money will not be adequate for either, and outcomes for both will continue to degrade. The cost to fix both will continue to increase. I'm over the false narratives. I'm over watching students and teachers suffer. I'm over watching half measures being spent on infrastructure just to spend the same money over and over again on poor roads. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the K-12 budget. Demonstrate that you value the public education system. Our children deserve better. Michiganders deserve better. Thank you.